Emily had never imagined her life could change so drastically in just a few weeks. The news of expecting twins had turned her quiet world inside out, but in the best way possible. She and David had always dreamed of starting a family together, but this was beyond anything they had ever dared to hope for. On a crisp autumn evening, the two sat curled up in their modest living room, the soft glow of the fireplace flickering across their faces. Emily watched as David's eyes shone with a mixture of awe and disbelief while she told him the news. "Twins," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion as he ran a hand through his sandy hair. "We're really having twins." She nodded, a smile so wide it made her cheeks ache spreading across her face. "Yeah. Can you believe it?" David pulled her into a tight embrace, his breath shaky with excitement. "I can't believe this, Emily. This is everything. Everything we ever wanted." In that moment they felt invincible. Their simple little life felt perfect. Nothing fancy but theirs. They had a cozy home in a quiet neighborhood, jobs that kept the bills paid, and most importantly each other. Now, with their future suddenly blossoming in the form of two tiny new lives, they had something to look forward to like never before. The next week was a whirlwind of baby names, nursery colors, and endless planning. David joked about how he'd need to master changing 2 diapers at once, while Emily scribbled lists of baby clothes and must-haves in a worn notebook. Neither of them had a clue how they'd manage the expenses, but none of that mattered. They were happy. Then, just as swiftly as the joy had come, it was ripped away. It happened late one evening, the sun long set and the house bathed in shadows. David had gone out to pick up groceries, leaving Emily alone with her growing belly. She was daydreaming about watching their twins run in the backyard someday, imagining a life filled with laughter and love. The phone rang. Emily's heart skipped. David should have been home by now. "Hello." Her voice was calm, unaware of the nightmare about to unfold. "Mrs. Carter." The voice on the other end was official, clipped, emotionless. "Yes," she answered, her voice steady despite the sudden chill crawling up her spine. "This is Officer Harris. I'm calling about your husband, David Carter." There was a pause long enough to make Emily's breath catch painfully in her throat. "There's been an accident." The words didn't register at first. "Accident?" she echoed, her mind refusing to connect the dots. "David was just out getting groceries." "How?" the officer continued, filling the silence with a cold precision Emily wished she could block out. "His car went off the road. We've searched the area, but we haven't been able to locate him." Emily's knees buckled. She sank down to the floor, clutching the phone like it was the last thing keeping her tethered to reality. No, this can't be happening," she whispered, disbelief crashing over her like a tidal wave. I don't understand. What do you mean you can't find him?" The voice softened slightly, but the blow was no less devastating. "We believe the current swept his car into the river. It's likely his body was carried away." Time slowed. The room seemed to close in on her, the walls pressing down as tears welled uncontrollably. The man she loved, the father of her children, was gone. And the worst part, there was no body, no farewell, no closure. Friends and family came with empty words of comfort, but Emily felt hollow. Her world was shattered, filled only with the suffocating silence where David's laughter once lived. Then, just when she thought it couldn't get any worse, it did. One afternoon, a sharp knock sounded at the door. Emily opened it to find a man she'd never seen before, his expression cold and unyielding. "Mrs. Carter?" he asked, though he clearly already knew the answer. "Yes," she replied cautiously. "I'm here to collect on the debts your husband left behind." Emily frowned, confusion twisting in her gut. "Debts? I don't understand. David never mentioned any debts." The man's lips curled into a humorless smirk. "He owed a significant amount to some, let's say, less than legal lenders. Now that he's gone, that responsibility falls to you." Emily's blood ran ice cold. David had never talked about owing anyone money. They weren't wealthy, but they had always made ends meet. How could this be possible? "I don't have any money," she whispered, dread curling like a serpent in her chest. "That's not my problem," the man said flatly. "You'll find a way, or else." And with that, he turned and left, leaving Emily standing in the doorway, stunned and terrified. The weight of the world crushed her. Pregnant, alone, and now burdened with a debt she had no hope of paying. The life she and David dreamed of was gone, replaced by a nightmare she couldn't escape. Days turned to weeks. Emily pushed herself harder and harder, taking any job she could find. She cleaned houses, worked long hours at diners, even took on odd jobs for neighbors, all while hiding her growing belly. She couldn't afford to slow down. Not with the relentless threats hanging over her head. But her body wasn't made to keep up with the pace forever. One night, as she scrubbed floors in a tiny convenience store, the world blurred and tilted. She swayed, clutching the counter, but it wasn't enough. The last thing she remembered was the cold tile rushing up to meet her, and then blackness. When Emily awoke, she was in a hospital bed. A nurse's gentle hand rested on her arm as the woman checked her vitals. "Your babies are fine," the nurse said softly, "but you're pushing yourself too hard. You need to rest." Rest. The word felt cruel. How could she rest when everything was falling apart? But the nurse's voice echoed in her mind, and Emily knew she had no choice. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for two little lives growing inside her. She cut back her hours, which only made the financial pressure worse. Bills piled up faster than she could pay. The calls from lenders grew more frequent and more threatening. Every phone ring made her heart pound, panic rising until she forced herself to answer. No matter how many times she explained, "I'm pregnant," she pleaded. "My husband is gone and I'm doing everything I can," the voices on the other end didn't care. To them, she was just another debtor. Another name on a list. Threats escalated. Men showed up at her door unannounced, their cold stares a reminder that they were always watching. "You have a month," one said, pressing a slip of paper into her hand. "Get the money or we'll make sure you pay. One way or another." Emily stared at the amount, disbelief sinking in. It was more than she could imagine, drowning in an ocean with no shore in sight. Every time she thought she might catch a breath, another wave crashed down harder. Desperation drove her to any work she could find, but exhaustion crept in. One night, as the neon lights of a local diner flickered overhead, Emily's vision blurred again. She gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself, but her body betrayed her. Darkness swallowed her whole. When she woke this time, the fear was deeper than before. She was pregnant, alone, drowning in debts she couldn't escape, and the world was closing in. But even in the darkest moments, the thought of her babies gave her strength. They were her light in the crushing shadows, the only reason she kept fighting. By the time the twins were born, Emily was running on empty. She held them close in the hospital, their tiny fingers curling around hers. For the first time in months, she let herself feel peace, a quiet moment amid the storm. She vowed then, no matter what, she would protect them. She would find a way to survive, even if it meant giving everything she had. But outside those hospital walls, the nightmare waited. The debts didn't disappear. The threats didn't stop. And with two mouths to feed, the pressure grew heavier every day. Weeks blurred into months. Sleepless nights, endless workdays. Her twins, now crawling and laughing, were the only bright spots in a life weighed down by fear. But every smile was tinged with dread. The debt collectors were always close, always watching. One particularly brutal day, the phone rang again. Another demand. Another reminder that she couldn't keep living like this. She needed a way out. And when the chance finally came, it wasn't a miracle. It was a lifeline. A job on a luxury cruise ship. Hard work, long hours. But enough money to pay off the nightmare chasing her. It was her only option. And without hesitation, Emily took it. 7 years would pass. But the weight on Emily's shoulders would never lift. Her twins, now 7, full of energy and laughter, remained blissfully unaware of the dangers lurking just beyond the walls of their small apartment. Emily had done everything to shield them from the past, from the debts, the threats, the fear. But every day was a battle she wasn't sure she could win. Despite working multiple jobs, barely making a dent in what she owed, the relentless calls and visits from debt collectors kept coming. Their threats grew darker, their patience thinner. Sometimes Emily feared for her own life, and worse, for the safety of her children. She was exhausted. Her body was worn, her mind frayed by years of constant fear. The twins noticed the lines beneath her eyes, the way her smile never reached them. But they never knew the truth. To them, their mom was strong, holding everything together no matter how broken she felt inside. One evening, after a grueling shift, Emily sat alone in her cramped apartment, bills spread across the table. Her hands trembled as she stared at the numbers that didn't add up. She had enough for rent, but that was it. No money for food. No money for the next payment. A sudden knock at the door made her jump. She knew who it was before she opened. Her heart hammered with fear as she cracked the door. There stood a man she dreaded, one of the debt collectors. Tall, cold-eyed, and utterly unyielding. "You're late again," he said flatly, like discussing the weather. "I just need a little more time," Emily whispered. "I swear I'll have the money soon." His expression didn't change. "You've been saying that for years, Emily. The boss is tired of waiting." Emily's throat tightened. She knew what that meant. Stories of people who crossed them, people who disappeared, haunted her. She had managed to scrape by for years. But now options were running out. "I have a job lined up," she said quickly, grasping at hope. "I'm starting soon. It's a good one. I'll pay everything off, I promise." The man raised an eyebrow, a flicker of interest in his cold gaze. "A job? Doing what?" Emily swallowed. "It's on a cruise ship. A luxury cruise. I'll be working as a waitress." The man considered her words. "A cruise, huh? That could work. But you better make sure it does. Or we'll come collecting, and it won't just be money we take." The implication hung heavy in the air. Emily nodded, her pulse pounding as he turned and walked away. Her body trembled, relief fleeting but enough. This job was her lifeline, her only shot at freedom. Emily's first weeks on the cruise ship were grueling beyond anything she had imagined. The grand halls and glittering chandeliers only made her feel more out of place. Her uniform, crisp, neat, was a far cry from the worn clothes she'd left behind. Every day, she was surrounded by people who seemed to float through life on waves of wealth she could never reach. Her feet ached from the endless hours on hard decks, serving guests whose smiles rarely reached their eyes. The polished floors and crystal glasses felt like a world apart from the cramped apartment where her twins waited, safe but far away. She kept her head down, saying little, avoiding conversations whenever she could. Her mind was tangled with worry, about the debt, the relentless calls, the looming threats, but mostly about Jacob and Lily. Every night she called Mrs. Reynolds, the kind, elderly neighbor who watched over the twins in her absence, her voice thick with longing. "How are they?" Emily would ask, forcing cheerfulness she didn't feel. "They're doing well, Mrs. Reynolds would reply, but Emily heard the weariness behind her words. "They miss you, Emily. Every day." But even that comfort couldn't drown the gnawing fear. How long before the collectors found her here? Could she really earn enough to pay them off? Would she ever see her children without looking over her shoulder? The first few days, Emily threw herself into work with grim determination. She memorized menus, learned the ship's layout, and mastered the art of balancing trays piled high with champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres. She smiled, as much as exhaustion allowed, and nodded at guests, doing her best to blend into the ship's glittering staff. But on the fourth day, everything changed. Emily was carrying a tray of drinks through the ship's upscale dining room when she froze. There, seated at a corner table bathed in warm light, was a man she hadn't expected to see again, David. Her heart slammed in her chest. Time seemed to stop. The bustling room faded into a dull hum as she stared at him. He looked nothing like the man who had vanished years ago. His hair was slicked back perfectly, his suit tailored and expensive. He carried himself with a confidence that made Emily's stomach twist. Beside him sat a woman with long, dark hair and a smile that glowed. She laughed softly at something David said, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Emily gripped the tray so tightly her knuckles whitened. Her mind scrambled, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. It couldn't be. He was supposed to be dead. A sharp voice nudged her back to reality. "Emily," one of the senior waitstaff whispered, gently guiding her away. "Tables are waiting." With trembling hands, she delivered the drinks to the other guests, every step a battle against the storm inside her. Her shift ended in a blur. Emily rushed back to her tiny cabin, heart racing and hands shaking. She needed answers. She needed to understand how the man who had disappeared, the man she had mourned and struggled to survive without, was here, alive and well, just yards away. But when she tried to confront him that night, all her rehearsed words vanished. She found him leaving the restaurant, the woman by his side. Her voice barely above a whisper, she called out, "David." He stopped, turning to face her. The recognition flickered in his eyes, a brief, haunted look, before he masked it with indifference. "Do I know you?" he asked coldly. Emily's blood ran cold. He was pretending. Right there in front of her, he was pretending not to know her. 7 years of pain, betrayal, and sacrifice crashed over her. "You know who I am," Emily hissed, stepping closer, eyes burning with anger and disbelief. "Don't you dare pretend you don't." The woman glanced between them, confused. "David, who is she?" she asked quietly. David sighed, eyes narrowing. "You must be mistaken. I don't know you." He turned to leave. Emily grabbed his arm, pulling him back. The woman gasped. David's calm facade cracked for a moment, his eyes darkening. "How could you do this?" Emily's voice broke as she spoke. "How could you leave me? Thought you were dead. I had to raise our children alone. I had to face everything you left behind." He jerked his arm free. "You don't know what you're talking about," he snapped. "If you don't leave us alone, I'll call security." Emily stared at him, heart shattering all over again. She wanted to scream, to cry, to shake him until he admitted the truth. But something in his voice told her this wasn't the night for that. He wasn't going to admit anything. Not here. Not now. She stepped back, hands trembling, as the woman clung to David's arm protectively. "Fine," Emily said quietly, voice steady despite the storm inside. "Keep pretending. But I know the truth. And I'm not letting you get away with this." David's eyes locked onto hers. A tense silence hung between them. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away. Emily watched them disappear into the crowd, fury and devastation tangled tight in her chest. The man she had loved, the father of her children, was gone. In his place was a stranger. A man who faked his death and left her to pick up the pieces. But Emily wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The days that followed passed in a blur. Emily moved through her shifts like a ghost, her mind spinning with thoughts of David and betrayal. Every glimpse of him, laughing with the woman, living a life far removed from hers, twisted the knife deeper. She needed answers. And she needed them soon. Late one night, after everyone else had gone to bed, Emily stood outside the suite where David was staying. The hallway was silent except for the faint hum of the ship's engines. Her heart pounded as she knocked. The door creaked open. David stood there, expression unreadable. "What do you want?" His voice was flat, almost bored. Emily swallowed. "I want the truth. I deserve that much." He sighed, stepping aside to let her in. The suite was opulent, far from the cramped quarters where Emily stayed. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the ocean, moonlight casting silvery light over plush furniture. David motioned for her to sit, but she remained standing, arms crossed as if shielding herself. He stared out at the endless water before speaking. "I didn't plan it, you know." Emily clenched her fists. "Didn't plan what?" "Leaving me. Leaving your children. Faking your death." He turned, expression softening just a bit. "I didn't plan for things to happen this way. It got complicated." Emily's frustration boiled over. "You disappeared. Thought you were dead. We held a funeral. I raised our kids alone. And all this time you were running from it all. Living another life." David flinched. "I was in deep. I owed more money than you could imagine. The debts, they wouldn't go away. I didn't know how to handle it. So when the accident happened, I took the chance." Emily felt the ground shift beneath her. "You took the chance?" "Yes. I thought it was the only way. If I faked my death, I could escape the debts and start over." "Did you think about us?" Emily's voice trembled. "Every day," he said quietly. "I was scared. The pressure crushed me. So I left." Emily shook her head, disbelief and rage flooding her. "You left us to deal with the mess. Do you know what I went through? What I had to do to keep our children safe and pay off your debts?" David looked down. "I know. And I'm sorry." Emily laughed bitterly. "That's all you have to say. Sorry." David ran his hand through his hair, frustrated. "What do you want me to say, Emily?" "Messed up. I made mistakes. But I can't change the past." She stared at him, the years of pain crashing through her. She had imagined this moment so many times, what she'd say if she ever saw him again. But now, faced with him, all she felt was betrayal. What about her? Emily gestured toward the door, the woman he'd been with. Was she part of the plan too? David hesitated. Emily saw all she needed to know. "I see," she whispered, heart sinking. "I didn't mean for it to happen this way," he said softly. But the words sounded hollow. Emily took a deep breath, voice steady despite the storm inside. "You may have escaped your debts, David. But you won't escape this." And with that, she turned and walked out. Back in her small cabin, Emily sat on the edge of her bed, mind racing. The truth was out. David had left her and their children, faked his death, and built a new life with someone else. Her heart pounded, hands shaking from the confrontation. But now, with shock behind her, a new feeling took root: determination. She wasn't the broken woman she'd been. She was stronger, harder. And she wasn't going to let David destroy her life anymore. The days after her confrontation with David were a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. Emily carried a weight lifted, yet new burdens settling in. She had faced the truth and spoken her mind, but now the real fight was just beginning. Her cabin on the cruise ship felt smaller somehow. The luxury and glamour surrounding her only sharpened the contrast to her reality. She was a woman with a mission: to protect her children and reclaim the life stolen from them, but the path ahead was tangled and dangerous. Emily knew she couldn't face David directly again, not without a plan, not without leverage. The years she'd spent dodging debt collectors and threats had taught her that survival wasn't just about strength, it was about strategy. Her first step was information. She began quietly digging through what she could access on the ship. As a member of the staff, certain records were available to her. Guest lists, cabin assignments, personal details. David had changed his name. Not completely, but enough to create a new identity that hid the man who had vanished years ago. Still, to Emily, no matter the name on paper, he was the same man who abandoned her and their children. Next, Emily turned her attention to the woman with David, Claudia. The name was on the guest list too. Claudia was not just some casual traveler. She was listed as David's wife. The realization twisted Emily's gut. They had built this new life together, a life founded on lies. The thought made her blood boil, but Emily swallowed it down. She couldn't afford to act on emotion. One evening, after a long shift, Emily found a quiet moment in the cruise break room. She pulled out her phone and sent a discreet message to an old friend, Marcus. Marcus wasn't exactly a law-abiding citizen, but he had connections and skills that Emily desperately needed. He worked in private investigations and had helped people find dirt on those who wanted to stay hidden. She laid out what she knew: David's new identity, his involvement with Claudia, the debts, and most importantly, the lies. Within hours, Marcus replied. The information he sent made Emily's skin crawl. David hadn't just been running from debts. He'd been at the center of a massive fraud scheme back in their hometown, a scam that had ripped off a wealthy businessman and countless others. Emily scrolled through documents Marcus had uncovered: bank transfers, fake contracts, emails exchanged between David and his accomplices. The evidence was overwhelming. David wasn't just a coward who ran away. He was a criminal who had stolen their future. This was the leverage Emily needed. But the danger was real. If she went to the authorities without preparation, the shadowy lenders, the agiotistas, who had been breathing down her neck for years, might turn their wrath on her and her children. They were ruthless, and Emily had seen what happened to those who crossed them. A risky plan formed in her mind. If she could deliver David to the agiotistas, using the debts he owed as bait, she could negotiate her own safety. They wanted money, it didn't matter who paid, as long as they got their cut. Emily's offer would buy her protection. It was dangerous, but it was the only move that made sense. Late that night, Emily called the man she had dealt with before, a liaison to the agiotistas. Her voice was steady as she laid out the situation. "I have proof," she told him. "I know where David is. I have evidence of his crimes, his fake identity." There was a pause. "Are you saying you can give us the man who owes millions?" the man asked, his voice cold and sharp. "Yes," Emily said firmly. "I can give you everything you need to find him." She waited, heart pounding. The man's silence was deafening. Finally he spoke. "What do you want in return?" Emily didn't hesitate. "My safety," she said. "I've been paying off his debts for years. I want those wiped clean. And I want my children and me left alone." Another pause. "I get David and all the money he owes you. I walk away clean. No more threats, no more visits." The man's voice was colder than before. "This better not be a lie. If you're tricking us, you'll regret it." Emily's hands trembled, but her voice was firm. "I'm not lying. I'll send the documents tonight. You'll see." That night, Emily gathered every shred of evidence Marcus had sent her. She packaged the bank records, emails, and fraudulent contracts into a secure file. With a steady hand, she sent everything to the agiotistas, along with David's whereabouts on the ship and his new identity. As the message was sent, Emily collapsed onto her narrow bed, exhaustion weighing heavy. For the first time in years, she felt like she was no longer running. She was fighting back. The next morning, Emily moved through her duties, but the air was thick with tension. Every glance from security personnel, every unfamiliar face in the hallway, made her heart skip a beat. The waiting was agonizing. Had the agiotistas received her message? Were they planning to act? Had she miscalculated? Doubt gnawed at her resolve. She found herself checking her phone obsessively, waiting for a sign that her plan was working. Then, just past noon, she noticed a sudden flurry of activity on the main deck. Security officers moved swiftly through the crowd, heading toward the VIP suites. Emily's pulse quickened. This was it. She followed at a distance, careful to stay out of sight. She watched as the officers reached David's suite and knocked on the door. A moment later, 2 guards entered. Emily couldn't see his face, but she imagined the shock and panic that must have flooded him. Minutes later, David emerged, flanked by the security officers. His face was a mask of confusion and anger, but Emily saw a flicker of recognition. He knew. He knew she had betrayed him. David didn't resist. He walked with his head held high, as if clinging to a shred of control. But Emily knew the truth. He was finished. As they led him off the ship, Emily stayed hidden, watching. Her breath caught in her throat as the crushing weight of 7 years began to lift. David was gone. And with him, the nightmare that had haunted her and her children for so long. But even as relief washed over her, Emily knew the journey wasn't over. There were still wounds to heal, debts to settle, and shadows to face. David's accomplice, Claudia, was still on board, laughing and carefree, unaware of the storm about to hit her. Emily's gaze hardened. It was time for one last confrontation. The corridors of the ship had quieted as the late evening settled in, the echoes of daytime chatter replaced by the gentle hum of the engines and the distant murmur of late-night festivities. Emily moved with a purpose that belied her exhaustion. Her footsteps soft but resolute on the polished floors. She clutched the small envelope of documents in her pocket, a tangible reminder of the years of pain, sacrifice, and relentless determination that had led her to this moment. Tonight, she was no longer the frightened woman who had arrived on this ship months ago. Tonight, she was a woman ready to face the last piece of the puzzle, the woman who had stood beside David in the life he had built on lies and betrayal. Her hand hovered momentarily before she knocked firmly on the heavy door of Suite 907. Time seemed to stretch between each beat of her heart. She waited, hearing the faint rustle of silk, footsteps approaching, and then the click of the lock turning. The door opened slowly, revealing Claudia in a flowing silk robe. Her face a picture of composed elegance, but with a flicker of surprise that didn't reach her eyes. "Can I help you?" Claudia's voice was smooth, almost rehearsed, as if used to handling unwanted interruptions with practiced grace. Emily forced a small smile, but it held none of the warmth it might have once carried. "We need to talk," she said simply. Claudia's gaze flicked over Emily's face, briefly appraising, then shifted toward the hallway behind her, as if checking for witnesses before turning back. "About what exactly?" she asked, lips curving into a faint, knowing smirk. Emily stepped forward, her voice lowering but gaining strength. "About David. About what he's done. And about what you've been a part of." The smirk faded. Claudia's eyes narrowed slightly, suspicion creeping in. "I don't know what you're talking about," Claudia said, her tone colder now. "Don't play dumb." Emily's patience snapped. "Don't lie to me," she said, taking another step closer, her eyes blazing. "You've been with him for years. You've lived off the money he stole. You knew about the debts, the lies. You helped him disappear, knowing he left me and his children to drown in the mess." Claudia's expression shifted, her mask faltering for a moment. A flicker of guilt or fear passed through her eyes before she quickly regained her composure. "Look," Claudia said, arms crossing defensively. "Whatever problems you have with David are between you two. I don't know anything about his past." "Liar," Emily spat. "You knew everything. You helped him build this lie. And now he's paying the price." Claudia's eyes widened, and she gripped the doorframe as if it would steady her. "What do you want from me?" she asked, voice trembling slightly, barely hiding the panic beneath her polished exterior. Emily's gaze hardened. "I've given the authorities everything. The evidence, the debts, the fraud. They know about him. They know about you. It's only a matter of time before they come for you too." Claudia's breath caught, her hands gripping tighter. "You can't be serious," she whispered. "I am," Emily said coldly. "No more hiding. No more running." For a long moment, Claudia was silent, her eyes darting around as if searching for an escape from this nightmare that had suddenly landed on her doorstep. Then her face paled, and the bravado slipped away entirely. "You're making a mistake," Claudia whispered, voice breaking. Emily shook her head, unyielding. "The only mistake I made was trusting David." Without another word, Emily turned and walked away, leaving Claudia frozen in the doorway, her face drained of color and her body trembling. Back in her cabin, Emily sank onto the edge of the narrow bed. The adrenaline that had propelled her moments before faded, replaced by a heavy fatigue that weighed on her limbs and her heart. She let her head fall into her hands, breathing deeply to steady the torrent of emotions inside. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel the full breadth of what had happened, the betrayals, the heartbreak, the relentless fight for survival. But intertwined with that pain was a quiet, fierce sense of victory. David was gone. Claudia would soon follow. The ghosts that had haunted her family were finally being chased away. But Emily knew the road ahead would not be easy. There would be legal battles, healing wounds, and rebuilding trust, not only with her children but with herself. There were moments ahead when the shadows of the past would threaten to overwhelm, when the memories of abandonment and struggle would resurface like unwelcome visitors. She was exhausted, bone-deep tired from years of running, hiding, and fighting. Yet she felt something she hadn't in a long time: hope. The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparation and careful calculation. Emily spent hours reviewing the evidence Marcus had helped her gather, organizing documents and emails into airtight packets. She knew the authorities would need everything to take down David and his accomplices for good. Each evening she called Mrs. Reynolds, the neighbor who had been her anchor through the darkest times. The elderly woman's voice was warm but tinged with concern. "Are you holding up, Emily?" Mrs. Reynolds asked gently one night. Emily smiled tiredly. "I'm getting there. It's finally happening. Things are starting to change." Mrs. Reynolds chuckled softly. "You've come a long way, dear. You're stronger than you know." Despite the growing hope, fear lingered. Emily often found herself lying awake in the dark, haunted by questions. What would happen to the twins if things went wrong? Could she keep them safe if the agiotistas decided she was a threat? Would the justice system be enough to protect them from the shadows still circling their lives? One evening, Emily sat by the window of her cabin, watching the moonlight dance on the restless ocean below. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the joy of pregnancy, the crushing loss, the endless fight to survive. She thought about the twins, Jacob and Lily, the reason she had refused to give up even when every hope seemed lost. Tears slipped silently down her cheeks. She was ready. The next morning, the ship buzzed with an undercurrent of tension that was impossible to ignore. Emily moved through her shifts carefully, avoiding attention, but every glance from security and every unfamiliar face made her heart race. Her phone became a lifeline. She checked it obsessively for any sign that her plan was in motion. Then the moment came. A sudden flurry of activity near the main deck drew her gaze. Security personnel moved swiftly through the crowds, heading toward the VIP suites. Emily's breath caught. This was it. She kept her distance, blending into the background as the officers reached David's door and knocked. The seconds stretched like hours. Then the door opened and 2 guards stepped inside. Emily could not see David's face, but she imagined the shock and panic he must have felt. Minutes later, David emerged, flanked by security. His face was a mix of confusion and anger, but Emily caught a flicker of recognition. He knew this was because of her. David did not resist. He walked with his head held high, but the mask of control was cracking. As they escorted him off the ship, Emily stayed hidden, watching through a narrow gap in a stairwell. Her breath caught as the reality settled in. After 7 years, the nightmare was finally ending. David was gone. And with him, the crushing weight that had suffocated Emily and her children for so long began to lift. Yet Emily knew this was not the end. There were still battles ahead. Claudia, the woman who had shared David's life and lies, was still on board. Emily's gaze hardened with renewed determination. That night, after her shift, Emily made her way quietly to Claudia's suite. She was ready for one final confrontation. The dawn broke pale and quiet over the harbor as Emily sat at the small kitchen table of her cabin, the first soft light filtering through the curtains. The events of the past days had left her drained, but somewhere deep inside, a stubborn ember of hope burned brighter than ever. David's arrest had sent ripples through the ship's undercurrents. Word traveled fast, whispered conversations among the crew, anxious glances, and a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. For the first time, Emily felt like the tides were turning. But the road ahead was still littered with uncertainties. Could justice truly reach a man who had spent years weaving shadows around himself? Could she finally carve a safe space for her twins, Jacob and Lily? Each question gnawed at her, but she forced herself to focus on what she could control. Her mornings began early, the routine of ship life grounding her, briefing with the team, memorizing guest preferences, and managing the endless flow of orders. Yet her mind often wandered to the small apartment she had left behind, to the innocent faces of her children, and to Mrs. Reynolds, whose steadfast care had been a beacon during her absence. The nights, however, were the hardest. Emily lay awake in the dim glow of the cabin lamp, staring at the ceiling, wrestling with a mixture of relief and dread. She had fought for this moment, but what came next? How would she rebuild the shattered fragments of her life? Would the past truly stay buried, or would the shadows find new ways to creep in? Then there was Claudia, the woman who had thrived in the lies alongside David, whose fate was still uncertain. Emily knew Claudia was no stranger to survival either. She was clever, resourceful, dangerous in ways different from David's recklessness. One evening, as the ship's main deck hummed with late-night energy, Emily found herself standing near the grand staircase, watching guests mingle and laugh under the stars. Her eyes caught Claudia's silhouette, framed by the soft glow of lanterns. Claudia was alone this time, her face tight with anxiety rather than confidence. Emily's heart pounded. This was the moment she had been preparing for. She approached cautiously. "Claudia," Emily called softly. Claudia turned, surprise flashing across her features. "Emily," she said, voice guarded. For a long moment, they simply regarded each other. Then Emily spoke, voice steady. "You've built your life on deceit. David's crimes are unraveling, and the authorities are closing in." Claudia's eyes flickered with panic. "I did what I had to do," she said sharply. "You think you're any different? You've played your own games." Emily shook her head slowly. "This isn't about games anymore. It's about justice. And I'm not going to let you escape it." Claudia's lip curled into a bitter smile. "Justice? After everything you've done? You think turning David in makes you innocent?" Emily's jaw clenched. "I'm not innocent. But I'm fighting for my children. For a future without fear." Their conversation was interrupted as footsteps echoed nearby. Claudia glanced toward the sound, then back at Emily, eyes narrowing. "This isn't over," Claudia warned before turning away quickly, disappearing into the crowd. Emily watched her go, a mix of triumph and apprehension swirling within. She knew Claudia would not surrender easily. The fight for freedom was far from finished. In the days that followed, Emily continued to cooperate fully with the authorities, providing testimony and sharing every piece of evidence she had gathered. The process was exhausting and emotionally taxing, but with each step, she felt the chains of the past loosen. At the same time, she focused on rebuilding her life. Letters arrived regularly from Marcus, updating her on the ongoing investigations and confirming that the authorities were closing in on David's network. Though cautious, Emily dared to dream of a future where Jacob and Lily could grow up without fear and without the shadow of debt hanging over them. One afternoon, she received a call from Mrs. Reynolds. "Emily, the kids have been asking about you," her voice trembled slightly. "They miss you terribly." Emily's throat tightened. "I miss them too," she whispered. That evening, Emily stood by the window, gazing out at the endless ocean, the setting sun painting the sky with hues of orange and pink. For the first time in years, she felt the promise of a new dawn. A dawn where she was no longer just surviving, but beginning to live. She was ready to fight for that life. For her children. For herself. The early morning light filtered softly through the curtains of Emily's cabin, casting gentle patterns on the worn wooden floor. She sat quietly by the small window, watching as the endless expanse of the ocean stretched toward the horizon, the ship's gentle sway a constant reminder of how far she had come, and how far there still was to go. 7 years of fear, sacrifice, and resilience had led her here, to this fragile moment of peace. But peace came with its own weight, heavier in some ways than the constant tension of the past. Emily's days had become a delicate balance between hope and exhaustion. Each morning began early, a whirlwind of preparation and relentless work on the ship, tending to guests with a practiced smile, navigating the polished halls where the wealthy laughed and danced, unaware of the storm that had passed through one of their own. Her feet ached, her body bore the marks of endless hours on hard floors, but her spirit remained unbroken. Beneath the surface, a quiet determination pulsed stronger than ever. Yet the shadows lingered. David's arrest had sent shockwaves through the ship's underbelly and beyond. The news traveled fast among the crew and staff, whispered conversations about the downfall of a man once thought untouchable. The ship's atmosphere shifted subtly, an undercurrent of tension threading through the glittering facade. Emily knew this was only the beginning. David's web of deceit and crime was vast. The authorities had launched investigations into his entire network, uncovering layers of fraud and manipulation that extended far beyond what she had imagined. Claudia, the woman who had shared his life, remained a figure cloaked in mystery and danger. One evening, Emily found herself on the ship's upper deck, the cool night air brushing her face as she leaned against the railing, gazing up at the stars glittering like distant promises. The ocean stretched endlessly before her, a dark mirror reflecting the vastness of her own uncertainty. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a message from Marcus lighting up the screen. "Claudia's been taken into custody. Things are moving fast. Stay sharp." Emily's breath caught. The tide was turning. Despite the cautious optimism, fear remained a constant companion. She thought often of Jacob and Lily, her reason for enduring every hardship. The sound of their laughter and their innocent faces were her anchor amidst the storm. Each night Emily called Mrs. Reynolds, the elderly woman who had become family in her absence. Their conversations were lifelines, a tether to the home she longed to return to. "Emily, how are you holding up?" Mrs. Reynolds' voice carried the warmth of years of care. "I'm surviving," Emily replied, voice steady but weary. "Every day is a battle, but I'm not giving up." The older woman sighed. "You're stronger than you know, dear. Remember that." The nights were the hardest. Emily lay awake in the dim glow of the cabin lamp, staring at the ceiling as memories of the past mingled with fears of the future. She wrestled with the weight of freedom, the heavy responsibility of rebuilding a life from the ashes of betrayal. Would the shadows find new ways to creep in? Would the danger ever truly fade? Claudia's name echoed in her mind. A woman who had thrived in the lies alongside David. Clever, resourceful, and dangerous in a way that made Emily's skin crawl. One evening, as the ship's main deck buzzed with the laughter and music of late-night revelers, Emily spotted Claudia alone near the grand staircase, her posture tight, her expression strained. The contrast to the confident woman Emily had confronted weeks ago was stark. Summoning her courage, Emily approached. "Claudia." The name hung in the air like a challenge. Claudia turned slowly, eyes narrowing as they locked onto Emily's. "Emily," she said, voice guarded but laced with simmering hostility. For a tense moment, they simply stared, two women shaped by the same storm but standing on opposite shores. Then Emily spoke, voice calm but resolute. "You built your life on deceit. David's crimes are unraveling. The authorities are closing in." Claudia's eyes flickered with panic before hardening. "I did what I had to do," she snapped. "Don't think you're any better. You played your own part." Emily shook her head slowly. "This is no game anymore. This is justice. And you won't escape it." Claudia laughed bitterly. "Justice? After all you've done? Turning David in doesn't make you innocent." Emily's jaw clenched. "I'm not innocent. But I fight for my children. For a life without fear." The conversation was cut short by approaching footsteps. Claudia glanced over her shoulder, then fixed Emily with a warning glare. "This isn't over," she said before slipping away into the crowd. Emily watched her go, a swirl of triumph and unease twisting inside her. The battle was far from won. In the following days, Emily worked closely with the authorities, providing detailed testimony, handing over every scrap of evidence she had collected. The process was exhausting, emotionally draining, but with each passing day, she felt the chains loosen. Letters and messages from Marcus kept arriving, updates on the investigation's progress. The network David had built was beginning to crumble. Still, the threat of retaliation lurked in every shadow. Emily was vigilant, aware that those loyal to David or driven by greed might target her or her children. She tightened security around her life, discreetly changing routines, seeking protection where she could. Every call with Jacob and Lily was a balm to her soul. Their voices, full of innocent joy, gave her strength to face whatever came next. Then, one crisp morning as the ship neared port, Emily received news that filled her with a mix of hope and solemn responsibility. David's trial was scheduled. The evidence against him was formidable, and the prosecution ready to seek justice. Claudia had been charged as well. Relief washed over Emily, but so did resolve. The fight was no longer just hers. It was for every broken promise, every stolen moment of peace. As Emily stepped off the ship into the bustling port city, the noise and rush around her felt distant. Her heart beat with fierce pride. She had survived. She had fought. And now she was ready to rebuild. With each step toward her future, Emily carried a vow in her soul. No matter the scars, no matter the hardships, she would protect her children. She would claim the life she deserved. And this time she would live it on her own terms. The soft glow of dawn spilled into Emily's modest apartment as she stirred awake. For the first time in years, the morning carried a sense of calm rather than dread. The weight of the past still lingered in the corners of her mind, but it no longer defined her. Jacob and Lily's laughter drifted from the next room, a melody that filled her heart with warmth and hope. She rose quietly, careful not to wake the twins too early. Moving to the small kitchen, she prepared breakfast with practiced hands, savoring the simple routine of nurturing her children. The apartment was humble, filled with mismatched furniture and toys scattered across the floor, but it was theirs. It was home. Emily's journey had been long and arduous. From the crushing debt and heart-wrenching betrayal to the desperate work on the cruise ship, the confrontation with David and Claudia, and finally, the steps toward justice. Now she stood on the threshold of a new chapter, one defined not by fear, but by resilience. Later that day, Emily walked through the nearby park with Jacob and Lily, their small hands tightly gripping hers. The sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows as the children chased after each other with carefree joy. Emily's heart swelled as she watched them play, their faces alight with laughter that was once so rare. As she sat on a bench, watching the scene unfold, Emily reflected on the lessons life had taught her. Strength, she realized, wasn't just about enduring hardships. It was about fighting for what mattered, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. It was about choosing hope every day. The trial of David and Claudia was underway, and Emily was preparing to testify. The process was draining, but she faced it with newfound courage, determined to ensure justice was served. Each day, she found solace in the small victories, support from unexpected allies, moments of genuine connection with friends and family, and the simple joy of watching her children grow. Evenings were her quiet time. After tucking the twins into bed and reading their favorite stories, Emily would sit by the window, gazing out at the city lights twinkling in the distance. She imagined the future, one where fear no longer cast a shadow over their lives. One night, Emily received a letter from the court. The verdict was approaching. Her hands trembled as she opened it, the words blurring momentarily before clarity set in. David and Claudia were found guilty on multiple counts: fraud, abandonment, and more. The judge's decision meant years behind bars, a formal severing of the past's chains. Relief flooded Emily, tears spilling freely. But alongside it was a solemn promise, to herself and her children, that the future would be different. No longer victims, they would be survivors and thrivers. The months that followed were a time of rebuilding. Emily found a steady job in a community center, helping other women facing hardships. Her story became a beacon of hope, a testament to strength and perseverance. Jacob and Lily flourished, their childhood slowly reclaimed from the shadows. Emily watched them with pride, their smiles brighter, their steps freer. One crisp autumn afternoon, Emily stood at the edge of the park, watching her children play. She felt a profound gratitude for the journey, the pain, and the victory. Her life was not perfect, but it was hers. With the sun warming her face, Emily took a deep breath. She was ready to live, to love, and to embrace every new day with open arms.